Great. Well, hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Carla Leandri Ryder, and I'm the Executive Director of the Rufus Porter Museum of Art and Ingenuity located in Bridgeton, Maine. Welcome to our third and our final virtual winter lecture of 2022. Tonight's presentation is on the history of the Hawthorne House and the Hawthorne Community Association, which is actually just down the street from the Rufus Porter Museum in Raymond, presented by John Manouche. Some housekeeping items before we begin. We ask that you please have your microphone muted and your camera off during the presentation. There will be a Q&A session at the end where you'll be able to speak directly to the presenter, or you can simply type your question into the chat box. For those of you not familiar with the Rufus Porter Museum, we were founded in 2005, and our mission is to celebrate the life, times, and legacy of a remarkable 19th century New Englander through preservation and promotion of creativity and invention. Rufus Porter is well recognized in the folk art world for his wall murals. However, he was much more than just an artist. He was a musician, teacher, inventor, and founder of Scientific American magazine, which is still in publication today. Our museum campus is home to two historic houses, the circa 1840 John and Maria Webb House and the circa 1790 Nathan Church House, which is one of Bridgeton's oldest surviving buildings and the original headquarters of the museum. We offer permanent and special exhibits, events, classes, lectures, and other educational opportunities that further our mission. We are open seasonally mid-June to mid-October, but we are also available by appointment. And to learn more about us, please visit our website at rufusportermuseum.org, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you're unable to visit us in person, we do offer an online tour on our website, as well as virtual access to our museum collection. I'd like to present our speaker for the evening, John Manouche. John grew up in the Boston suburb of Watertown and attended the University of Massachusetts Amherst before serving in the Peace Corps in Brazil in 1970 and 1971. He later earned a master's degree in food science and began a 27-year career as quality manager for Portland's own B&M Baked Beans. John's interest in history began in the early 2000s when he became a trustee of the Hawthorne Community Association. John also served as secretary for the Raymond Casco Historical Society from 2016 to 2019. He and his wife, Kim, recently relocated to Venice, Florida, after living in Standish and Raymond for many years. Welcome, John.
Okay. I hope that everyone can see me all right. This is all a little bit new to me. Carla, you'll let me know if there's anything I need to do on my end. Okay, good. She gives me the thumbs up. Well, thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you to all of the folks who are listening in. This, as I was saying, this Zoom thing is a little bit new to me. I've only used it previously for talking to friends and family, but I think with Carla's help, I've got the hang of it here. As Carla said, I really have no training in history. In fact, I think the only history course I ever took was in high school, and I've forgotten most of that. But due to living near the Hawthorne House and getting involved with that, I began to take an interest in early 19th century American history, in Hawthorne in particular. My lack of qualifications here reminds me a little bit of the story of the professor's chauffeur. And if you've heard me tell this before, my apologies. But back in the early part of the 20th century, there was a well-known professor of nuclear physics who in those days, of course, without air travel or internet, used to travel around the country on the lecture circuit. And he had a well-regarded chauffeur who took him around to these various places. Well, after about 20 listenings of this lecture, the chauffeur said to the professor at one point, "You know, I've heard that talk so many times that I think I could give the lecture." And the professor, having a pretty good sense of humor, said, "You know, I'm going to take you up on that." So at the very next stop, the chauffeur got up, did a beautiful job giving the lecture. Everyone seemed very pleased. But then some guy in the back raised his hand and said, "Excuse me, professor, but I wonder if you could expound a little bit on the difference between string theory and particle theory of the atomic nucleus." To which the chauffeur looked a little bit worried for a second, but then he said, "You know, that question is so elementary that I'm going to let my chauffeur out in the audience answer it for me." So that's kind of where I'm at. What I'm going to do on the talk today, it's kind of divided in three parts. And the first part is a lot of interesting learning for me because I knew virtually nothing about Rufus Porter. So Carla and I agreed it might be interesting if we compared and contrasted the two great men who actually were contemporaries, both of time and place, very close, as you'll see, in a number of ways. Yet we have no specific knowledge that they knew each other or definitely influenced each other. Now, this will test my Zoom skills. I'm going to switch from this shot of me. By the way, I must say it's a beautiful evening here in Raymond in front of the Hawthorne house. And so warm that I didn't even feel I needed a jacket tonight. So fantastic. All right, we're going to switch to a slideshow, and then I will be speaking to that. And then at the end, we'll come back to me again. So this will take just a second, and hopefully I'll get this right. Bear with me. Okay. How's that? I think we're good. All right, that's the same shot that we were looking at, but without me in front of it. And we will move along here, hopefully. Good. Well, there's our young man, Nathaniel Hawthorne, perhaps less than 30 years old, a very nice looking young man, certainly. And then as we go along through life, he might be in his at 46 there on the left, and I don't know what on the right, but perhaps close to 60. So like most of us, he went downhill a little bit, but that is to be expected. Mr. Porter, this was the only picture I was able to find of him, and I don't really know when it was taken, but just looking at him and his hand, I might judge that he was 75 or 80. He lived to a ripe old age. The Hawthorne house was used, of course, initially for the Hawthorne family to live in. Then it went through a history as a tavern and meeting house. And then third of all, with the formation of the Hawthorne Community Association, a historic home as it is currently preserved. So let's take a look at these two guys. And I've got Nathaniel Hawthorne listed on the left and Porter on the right. Well, first of all, their families coming to America. Hawthorne's ancestor was William Hathorne, and that's not a typo, but Nathaniel changed his name by inserting a W to make it Hawthorne as his literary career took off. I'm going to continue to pronounce it Hawthorne just because it just seems confusing and difficult to say Hathorne at times and Hawthorne at others. In any case, William arrived around 1630 from Bray, England, and settled in Salem. This William became a successful merchant and was also prominent in the government and the military. On the Porter side, his ancestor John arrived in the early 1600s, so close to the same time, from Dorset, England, and settled in Salem. He did very well for himself, becoming quite wealthy, perhaps more so than the Hawthornes, owned a large amount of land, and there were many prominent Porter descendants over the years, in addition to Rufus, although I am quite sure he was the most famous. For the Hawthornes, the family home remained in Salem, where Nathaniel was born in 1804, one of three children. For the Porters, the family moved to West Boxford, which I had never heard of, but apparently it's a bit southeast of Lawrence and Haverhill. They moved there in 1716. Rufus was born in 1792, one of six children. Nathaniel's father was a ship's captain who died of yellow fever in 1808, leaving his widow with very little money. As a result, the Hawthornes eventually moved to a home in Raymond, Maine that was built by her brother around 1812, when Nathaniel was perhaps 8 or 9 years old. On Rufus Porter's side, his parents inherited the family farm, so it's assumed that they remained fairly prosperous. The Porters moved to the Bridgeton, Maine area, I believe then called Flintstown, which was news to me, in 1801, when Rufus was 9 years old. So I see two strong similarities right there. Both boys moved to the same area of Maine, Raymond and Bridgeton, when they were about 9 years old. Both families had initially settled in Salem, Massachusetts. That's quite incredible in itself. As we move along to education, Nathaniel briefly attended school in Stroudwater, Maine, and then returned to Salem in 1819 to prepare for college. He then attended Bowdoin College from 1821 to 25, having several classmates who became well-known in their own right, and we'll speak about them a little bit later. Rufus Porter attended Freiburg Academy for about 6 months before becoming an apprentice shoemaker of all things. I could find no information on formal education, although Carla might correct me at the end if I'm missing something. However, there were a couple of coincidences that popped up. Rufus's grandfather, Benjamin, was related by marriage to an ancestor of Longfellow's. Another coincidence is that Harriet Beecher Stowe's stepmother was named Harriet Porter, and she was related to Rufus Porter. Of course, Harriet Beecher Stowe married Calvin Stowe, who was a classmate of Nathaniel Hawthorne's at Bowdoin. The Hawthorne family returned to Salem in 1825, leaving the home in Maine. And from that point on, Nathaniel variously lived in Boston, Concord, and Lenox, Mass., as well as back in Salem again. He was married in 1842 and had 3 children. Rufus Porter lived in Connecticut primarily, but traveled widely in New England and the rest of the Northeast, mostly for his mural painting work. One rather unusual trip for the time was a trip he made to the Pacific Northwest and even Hawaii in 1818. Quite an adventuresome trip in those days. He was married in 1815 and had 10 children. He was then widowed in 1848, but promptly remarried in 1849. Something I've noted was quite common, particularly for wealthy men at that time, to not remain unmarried for very long. He then had 6 more children. Unfortunately, only one of those survived, which is far worse odds than the typical odds in those days, where about 1 out of 7 children did not survive to reach adulthood. Just a moment. Okay. Hawthorne, of course, became successful as a novelist with his first published work of short stories in 1837. Rufus Porter early on had a dancing school in Connecticut and painted both portraits and murals. As well, he was interested in science and inventing. In 1825, he published an inventor's guide. Rufus Porter was truly a multi-talented person. He seemed like he was in 10 different directions at once and good at everything he did. Hawthorne's major novels were published during the 1850 to 60 period. Although he was one of the most famous Americans, it doesn't appear that he ever became wealthy. He had one break in 1853. His pal, President Franklin Pierce, appointed him US consul to the UK, or England at that time, in 1853. On Porter's side, he started Scientific American, which Carla mentioned, which he later sold. He experimented with airships and published a book on aerial navigation in 1849. Perhaps he didn't quite achieve Hawthorne's fame, but he certainly earned much lasting respect and admiration for his many talents. Nathaniel died in 1864 and was buried in Concord at the age of 60. Rufus Porter was buried in West Haven, Connecticut, living to the age of 92. Quite incredible for those days. Now I'm going to talk about the building of the Hawthorne House and its use as a home for the Hawthorne family. Most of you probably know where the Hawthorne House is, but this map shows Route 302 going through the lakes area, heading west like so. Big Sebago Lake on the left and the much smaller Thomas Pond on the right. There's an outlet from Thomas Pond that flows into Sebago Lake. And along that small river is right where the Hawthorne House is located at this point. As you're on Route 302, there is a left here, not coincidentally called Hawthorne Road. This road is called Cape Road, and that extends about 5 miles on a peninsula that goes out into Sebago Lake. Nathaniel was born on the 4th of July in 1804 to Nathaniel Hawthorne and Elizabeth Clark Manning. As I mentioned, he later changed his name to Hawthorne. And I also mentioned that his father died of yellow fever in Suriname in 1808. Initially, having little money, he and his mother and sisters lived with Elizabeth's brother Robert there in Salem, where Nathaniel first developed an interest in reading and books due to his uncle's library. She had another brother named Richard, who had already moved to Raymond, Maine, that time called Raymond Town, and built himself a home, and he offered to build her a home. He owned approximately 12,000 acres in this area, including much of it on Sebago Lake, based on land grants that went to people who had participated in the French and Indian Wars. Richard Manning had a blacksmith shop, a store, and a coach line, among other businesses, so he was quite successful. Richard built his own mansion or home on Cape Road, just a couple of hundred yards away from the Hawthorne house. And this is an older picture of it. I'm happy to say it looks much nicer than that today. Unlike the Hawthorne house, it has been continually occupied, not by descendants of the Mannings, but by other families who have had an interest in old colonial homes and preservation. And as you see it today, it would be much more, much neater looking. Those overgrown bushes and things have been taken care of. And I'm happy to say the Manning house is in pretty good shape. You can easily see the resemblance between this house and the Hawthorne house in style of construction. Very, very similar and very popular style in those days. And as I learned a little bit about the Rufus Porter Museum, I could not help but notice the extreme similarity here as well, right down to the 9/6 pane windows and the number of windows and the placement and everything. It's quite amazing. I guess it was a popular style in those days. From all accounts, little Nathaniel, at his age of 9 or 10, was very happy in Maine. He had a lot of freedom. He loved walking in the woods, hunting with his uncle's gun, fishing in the lakes. In the winter, he enjoyed skating on the ice on Sebago Lake. And if I might just brag a little bit here, I took this picture while skating on Sebago Lake in 2003, and that is Fry's Leap right there, where Nathaniel and I, not together, but each climbed to the top of that and enjoyed the beautiful view of Fry Island and off to the right, Rattlesnake Mountain. This was an unusual year in that the lake froze one cold, still night to have this beautiful, smooth ice, which almost never happens. Now we're going to do a little more, give you a little more information about the Hawthornes. His uncle Richard was an important mentor to little Nathaniel. The Mannings were childless, so Richard assumed a fatherly role. He also had an extensive library where Nathaniel first read some of the classics of the day, such as Pilgrim's Progress and Shakespeare. Nathaniel kept a boyish diary, and I'm going to read an excerpt from it, trying to sound like a 10-year-old boy. This morning, the bucket got off the chain and dropped back into the well. I wanted to go down on the stones and get it. Mother would not consent for fear the well might cave in, but hired Samuel Shaw to go down. In the goodness of her heart, she thought the son of old Mrs. Shaw not quite so good as the son of the widow Hawthorne. I certainly wish we had more details about the Hawthornes' lives at that time, but there's practically no information available. Hawthorne later destroyed many of his personal papers because of his penchant for privacy. Even though we have these couple of little diary excerpts, it surprises me that there is no mention of major events that were going on in the world and in New England at that time. A couple of examples, many of you probably have heard of the year without a summer in 1816, caused by one of the hugest volcanic explosions in human history in Indonesia. in the previous year. It ejected so much ash and dust into the atmosphere that it changed the weather, where in New England, it was extremely cold and even snowed in the summer, and crops failed widely. Yet everything in Raymond seemed to be going along fine as far as Nathaniel was concerned. In 1812, there was also something going on called the War of 1812. In 1814, the British occupied a good deal of eastern Maine, but apparently that wasn't worth mentioning in his diaries either. Probably more concerned with fishing and hunting. Given the difficulty of traveling long distances in those days, it was an all-day stage ride to Portland and about 4 days on bumpy, nasty roads to Salem. Most people's daily travels were limited to places they could walk to in a reasonable time. The area near Sebago Lake was a rough and largely undeveloped wilderness at the time, and I'm sure life was difficult. The main activities near the Hawthorne house would have been 2 nearby mills, one for corn and one for lumber, plus maybe a blacksmith shop and a general store. I might guess these subjects were just part of everyday life and not considered remarkable or worthy of writing about. Hawthorne had wanted to follow his father to sea, but his mother and uncles took note of his intelligence and decided to send him to college. In preparation, he returned to Salem in 1819 to continue his schooling. Finally, in the fall of 1821, he entered Bowdoin College in Brunswick. Here he made many lifelong friendships, among them Calvin Stowe, who I mentioned earlier, the husband of Harriet Beecher of Uncle Tom's Cabin fame. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was a classmate, and of course, other than Stephen King, I might judge Henry Wadsworth Longfellow to be the best known Maine writer. And of course, Franklin Pierce of New Hampshire, later to become one of the least well-regarded presidents of the United States for his willingness to allow expansion of slave states. Hawthorne graduated from Bowdoin in 1825 and settled down in Salem, where he began his literary career. Any later stays at the Raymond home, if any, are not recorded. After Hawthorne graduated from college, his ailing mother also returned to Salem. As far as we know, the Hawthorne house was never occupied by a family again. Despite the success of The Scarlet Letter and House of Seven Gables, Nathaniel Hawthorne is among the group of successful writers who died with little to his name. Authors simply did not draw the kinds of royalties they do today, and he lived simply in Salem and later in Lenox in Western Massachusetts and then Concord, Massachusetts. He became a good friend of Herman Melville and reviewed early drafts of Moby Dick, which was eventually dedicated to Hawthorne when it was published in 1851. As I mentioned briefly, he was appointed U.S. consul by his buddy Pierce in 1853 and lived in Liverpool, briefly journeyed a bit in Europe, including Italy, then returned to Concord. Although only 56 at that time, it appears he had aged quite a bit, and failing health prevented him from completing more major works. As I mentioned earlier, he died at the age of 60. Now I'd like to turn my attention to what happened to the house after the Hawthornes. For a time, the house was known as Colonel Scribner's Tavern, used for visitors from coaches and canal boats during the heyday of the Cumberland and Oxford Canal, which was begun in 1832. I never was able to find out who Colonel Scribner was, despite putting some effort into it. I can only assume that Richard Manning was still the owner of the house at that time. However, he died in 1831, but he had left a bequest for a church to be built for the community. His widow, Susan, became involved with a Frenchman named Francis Radu, who suggested that Manning's request could best be served by converting the Hawthorne house. Acting on that suggestion, the fireplaces and chimneys, partitions, and the second floor were removed to leave a large empty shell with a small balcony. Wooden pews and double entry doors were installed. I will only guess this occurred around 1845. In this modern day picture, taken from the back wall of the house looking toward the entrance, you can see the entrance door, and those blue pews on the side are the very same ones that were used by that congregation. I can tell you those are pretty uncomfortable. You can kind of see even in this picture that the back and the seat are flat as could be, and they meet at a 90-degree angle. Not the most comfortable. There was great interest. Oh, there is another picture of the house from the side angle. Then the entrance would be on our left, and there's a small stage on the right. The two doors on the far back left, one of them is a unisex bathroom, and the other is a small kitchen. At this time, there was great interest in religion. It was known as the Second Great Awakening. But since this house was not owned by a particular church or denomination, it was a free meeting house. No one group owned it, and disrepair crept in over the next 25 years. This is the oldest known picture of the Hawthorne house. We don't really even know the date. I only have an estimate there. A passerby in 1870 wrote this: "A little way off the main travel road in the town of Raymond, there stood an old house which has much in common with houses of its day, but which is distinguished from them by the more evident marks of neglect and decay. Its unpainted walls are deeply stained by time. Cornice and window ledge and threshold are fast falling with the weight of years. The fences were long since removed from all the enclosures. The garden wall is broken down, and the garden itself is now grown up to pines whose shadows fall dark and heavy upon the old and mossy roof. The highway once passed its door, but the location of the road has been changed, and now the old house stands solitarily apart from the busy world. Longer than I can remember, this house has stood untenanted and wholly unused, except for a few years as a place of public worship. But for myself, and for all who know its earlier history, it will ever have the deepest interest, for it was the early home of Nathaniel Hawthorne." That mention in here about the highway passing its door is true. Route 302, as we know it today, did not exist, and the major stage or coach routes through this lakes area did pass right by the Hawthorne house. In 1877, a parish was formed that purchased the deed for $400, and it became known as the Redu Union Meeting Parish. Although we sometimes feel regret that the character of the house was forever changed, we accept that the 40-odd years the house was a place of worship was greater than the 13 years it was used as the Hawthorne's residence. By the way, this is a rather somber-looking group, although we have to remember in those days you had to stand still quite a while for a photograph to be taken. I like this little one right here. I'll bet if those kids did not behave and fidgeted too much on those hard benches, they got a good rap on the knuckles, because that's the way it was done in those days. Well, from here, we will go on to the formation of the Hawthorne Community Association. The following 3 or 4 pictures are mostly old postcards to show the house in various stages. By the way, the 2 houses that are across Cape Road behind the Hawthorne house still exist in not too different condition than they are here. This one is brick, this one is frame. And in fact, this one has been owned and occupied by the Hawthorne Association's current president, Mr. Abel Bates, and is still going strong. Anyway, a group of summer residents successfully petitioned the courts to grant the house to the association in July of 1922 for the purpose of preserving the house and using it as a community center. Interest continued to flourish for a few years, but unfortunately, the Depression and World War II caused yet another decline. This picture is a little interesting to me because it shows the house from a different angle, not from the roadside. And I'm amazed at this big open field here because today this is all grown up with trees and brush. Something that we have had to deal with quite a bit is the overgrowth of plants. And we have tried to deal with that in order to improve the survival of the house. This is one that's just a little bit later, but you can see even in the 1950s, the house still had the double door meeting configuration to the entrance. Here's the earliest picture we could find of somebody speaking at the Hawthorne house. And this piano is still in the house. I'm not sure if we still have any of these chairs, maybe one pair or two. This lectern and these velvet covered chairs are still here. I don't know who the speaker is, and I do wonder where the audience is. I can only guess that perhaps the speaker was just practicing, or maybe he was doing a Zoom presentation. During these years, it did serve as a community hall sometimes, a film theater for benefit dances and pageants. A more stable economy and the arrival of wealthier summer residents in the 50s brought a revival of interest. The house was repaired and painted, and the double doors were changed back to the original door with side lights and a sunburst design above, as it remains today. You can see in this house from this picture from the early 80s that shutters were added, which are not original, although they look kind of nice. The fact that they're not original, we let them expire when they began getting rotten about 20 years later. The next time the house was painted, they were removed and discarded, so the house will remain without shutters. Here's one just a little bit later. There's been a little bit of tree removal going on. That entrance door is a replacement, same style, but you can see it's a nice mahogany, a very attractive door. The Hawthorne House was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1969. Now let's move on to the current era. We've been fortunate to maintain an average of around 100 members for several years, although that has increased recently due to the publicity surrounding our fundraising campaign that began in 2020. Landscaping work has been donated by the Hawthorne Garden Club, with whose help we replaced an unsightly area of parking lot in 2003. You can see the before and after here. And a few years later, we have some color coming up, and it makes a very pleasant sight as one drives by on Cape Road. In order to prevent more damage from moisture, we removed trees and shrubs that were cutting off sunlight and air. And you can see the before and after here as well, where we've gotten rid of a lot of trees and opened up around the foundation so that air and light can get in there. The one on the right says 2012. We did have a bicentennial celebration there that year, which went very well. We've long faced a major concern with the foundation, whose granite blocks have shifted over the years. I know this looks like a bombed out place that you wouldn't want to be anywhere near. It's amazing that it held up the house as long as it did. Because of these worries, we put it off, but finally in 2019, we hired a structural engineer, not only to look at the foundation, but to look at all possible threats to the survival of the house. He identified three principal concerns. At the top of the list, of course, was the foundation, but he also identified an issue with the roof support that could perhaps collapse if there was an unusually heavy snow or ice load. And that is something we did not know about. And the siding, which we did know about. We find that when we scrape and paint the house anew, it looks nice for about 2 years and then seems to revert to this mildewed condition because it's so impregnated into the soft wood. We had an estimate of about $75,000 to do all these repairs. It wouldn't surprise you to know that it's going to be even more than that. So we are continuing fundraising. However, I'm very happy to say that the biggest part of this work, I will go back a little bit and acknowledge people who have been so generous to donate to the Hawthorne House on this campaign are being acknowledged by means of this giving tree, which is in the entry hallway of the house. Also happy to say that we've had to add many more branches and more leaves to it because of the generosity of these folks. The foundation work, I'm happy to say, is completed and was done in 2021. You can see here that the house has been lifted on steel girders. Footings have been poured. Concrete block has been laid on top of those footings. While we're on this shot, I'll also mention that you can see here around, whoops, I messed that one up a little bit. See here around to the right, we've installed a couple of those heat pumps. Previous to this, the house only had a very old oil burner and no air conditioning. So this gives us, since most of our events are held in the summer, it has always been a little questionable. And I can tell you from experience, it's not very pleasant to sit in a hot room in an uncomfortable chair to listen to somebody speak. Now with this addition, people can sit in a cool room in uncomfortable chairs. So it's much better. Siding and roofing projects are planned for 2022, and the fundraising continues. Over the years, the granite facing was added on top of the concrete block in order to give it a close to original appearance. The same will be done with siding. If it is replaced with new wood, it will continue to have the original appearance. We have a sort of a calendar of events which has become a little bit routine, and that's in a good way. We open up the beginning of each summer season with a strawberry festival in June, and this would be a typical occasion for someone to give a talk on a subject of interest. In this case, it was gardening. We have a barbecue at the local, one of the local summer camps that is called Wohelo. One tie in there, the original founder of that camp, Luther Gulick, was an original founder of the 1922 Hawthorne Community Association. So we have always maintained a close association with them. We have revived a Halloween party, and this is our very own Abel Bates doing a pretty good imitation of Mr. Hawthorne. And a great event is a Christmas potluck party in early December. In addition, occasional events such as art sales, yard sales, and private parties, as long as they're small and quiet ones. Now, the publicity of fundraising has had, oh, I didn't mention, back in 2004, that would have been Nathaniel's 200th birthday. We hired a young actor from the University of Maine to come in and portray Hawthorne, and he did a great job speaking to us as if he had come back from beyond and thanking us for taking such good care of his house over the years. Today, and just recently, due to this additional attention that the fundraising has focused on the Hawthorne House, there's been a current initiative of trying to utilize the house for more community events and small private parties. So the interior has recently been redecorated, as shown in this slide. I'm not sure I should say redecorated because previously it really wasn't decorated at all. It was just an empty shell. So it's very nice to walk in now and see this more inviting atmosphere, a place where people might feel comfortable to sit down. There's now Wi-Fi, having small meetings, art groups, book groups, and things of that nature. We do charge for the use of the house if it's a private party, but there's a sliding scale all the way down to 0 if it's a Town of Raymond organization, and something in between for nonprofits. If interested, one can get this information from the website or call. It would be wonderful if the house could be put back into this kind of a condition of a colonial house that might be what it looked like when the Hawthornes lived there. But of course, we can neither afford to do that, nor do we have any way of knowing what the interior even looked like in those days. I remember one of our strawberry festivals, an out-of-town visitor came in and he was looking around. He seemed a little disappointed. Finally, he came up to me and he said, you know, this would be so much better if you did like Old Sturbridge Village or Colonial Williamsburg and had it look like it did when people lived here. And I said, yes, that would be great, but we can't even come close to beginning to afford doing anything like that. Would you be willing to help support us with just a $15 contribution? To which he thought for a second and said, nah. All right, so much for that. Well, somebody does appreciate what we're doing and appreciate your interest. You'll see the website address is at the bottom there. And if you can't remember that, you certainly can just search for Hawthorne Association or Hawthorne Community Association in Maine. I found out there are a couple of other Hawthorne associations that are homeowners associations and things like that in other states. But that will get you to this one easily enough. There you will find announcements of upcoming events, of course, links to donations, which we always appreciate, plus much more historical information than I've been able to give you today, including some more detailed accounts of Hawthorne's life and more photos. I'd like to thank the group and the Porter Museum. I'm going to come back to myself if I can figure out how to do this correctly. That should be me. I hope that's what you can see, standing in front of the Hawthorne House again. And it looks like a pretty nice evening, but I think we might be getting some rain or snow. So let me get prepared for that. And meanwhile, Carla, if you want to try to take over on the question and answer, you can go right ahead at any time.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was very, very informative. So, we've got some questions coming in. Let's take a look here. How long did Nathaniel attend the school in Stroudwater? Who was the professor? Was it a dame school?
I guess I can answer all three questions with the same answer. I don't know. I think he attended Stroudwater about 1 year. And I do remember reading something about the fact that he hated his professor there. But I really do not know the name of the professor, and I'm sorry. I wish I could.
All right, another question from Madeline. You mentioned Colonial Scribner. Is there any connection to Scribner's Mills?
Same answer. I don't know. I made some attempt to find out. I did some web searches a year or two ago about Colonel Scribner in Maine, and nothing came up, although, you raised a good point. And in fact, I'm going to make a note of that and see if I can find out anything about it. So thank you for the idea, but unfortunately, I don't have the answer at this moment.
And then we just have a comment from Judy. She says that was an excellent presentation.
Love it. Thank you. Very happy to do it.
And anyone is welcome to unmute if you want to ask a question that way, or the chat box is just as good.
John, it's Tom Ewing.
Hey, Tom.
How are you? First of all, I want to thank you for that presentation. And I just wanted to mention that.
I'm muted.
I'm muted.
No, you are fine. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that in the meantime, what we've also done is we've installed a couple of bookshelves in there, and we have a large library now of Nathaniel Hawthorne material, as well as just purely historical books. And we really want to encourage in the spring for people who want to just come and then sit down and read a book or something like that to make themselves comfortable there. And we want to try and expand that library. But John, I want to say also, as I mentioned to you before, when you have a corporation, the hardest part of a corporation is starting it. And you laid all the foundations for that Hawthorne House over many, many years of very hard work. And we today who are laboring at it really want to say thank you very much for all of your hard work and getting us started.
Well, very kind of you. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, looks like we got some more in the chat. Kathy wants to know, did Hawthorne work at the Customs House in Salem?
Yes, I didn't mention that since it wasn't part of his main experience, but I believe that was one of his early jobs before he was making any money as a writer. He did secure a job at the Customs House. I guess it was in Salem. I really wasn't sure if it was Salem or Boston, but yes, that was a paying job that he had for a time, which tided him over until he was able to earn some money as a writer, which, as I said, was never not from a lot of money, but he made do.
right, and Madeline has another question here. Does the Hawthorne House have any connection with local high schools that are reading the Scarlet Letter?
It does not. We have discussed that over the years, that we should do something like that. The idea has been floated around, and perhaps we will, because it is a appealing idea. But like so many things, it's a matter of, finding somebody to take it and run with it. And so far, we have not done it, but I thank you for the thought, and perhaps it's something that we will finally, with the additional energy that has been breathed into the Hawthorne House in the last couple of years, largely because of the fundraising and the repairs. Perhaps that's something that whose time has come.
And then Lori asks, is the house open for tours?
Yes and no. It doesn't have regular hours because there simply isn't enough traffic by there or enough interested people to justify having someone, sit there and wait. However, if you go on the website, there is an email address and a phone number, and the association is always happy to set up a tour. Even if it's just one family, it doesn't have to be a busload of people. So don't hesitate to do that if you've never been there. Or of course, if it's near one of the times of one of the events, like a strawberry festival, something like that, then, or even a yard sale or any of these other events that go on from time to time, that could be an opportune time to stop by and see the house.
Anyone else? Don't be shy.
I'll put a plug in for the Strawberry Festivals. I think usually the third weekend in June, correct? And not only do they serve you the most beautiful strawberry shortcake you ever saw, and chocolate covered strawberries usually, they have a speaker that is always very entertaining and informative.
Great, thank you for that.
Thanks, Louise.
My center?
Yes, I don't know.
Sylvia, do you want to say something? It looks like you're unmuted.
Yeah, no, Abel did.
Yeah, thanks. I think you did a great job, John. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, my friends.
And then Eleanor says, thank you so much. Can't wait to visit in June.
Great, great.
Oh, there is an event calendar.
I say it again.
Yeah.
Event calendar.
Tony, it looks like you have your hand raised. Did you want to say something?
Abel did.
No, I just want to let you know that we do have an event calendar on the website now. We're still working on it. And so if you want to see what the dates are that we have booked right now, or if you did want to book the house for any private function, that's the place to do it. And as John said, just it's Hawthorne Association, and Google that and it'll take you right to the website.
Great.
Who's Tony?
Yes, hello? Can you
Hi.
hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
Yes, so I just want to thank you so much. I'm so pleased to see this. I'm actually Caroline, my husband Tony's grandfather founded Camp Agawam. So we have a long history with Raymond. And I first discovered the house when we drove our daughter to Wabanach. So I've watched it over the years and worried about it. And I'm delighted that you've done this tremendous amount of work. And I wish you a lot of luck. And I look forward to visiting this summer.
Great. Thank you, Tony.
I should unmute myself. Okay.
Kara says the comparison between the two main men was wonderful. What a unique talk. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. It was fun learning about them. By the way, I might just add, I mean, this whole thing has been a nice opportunity for the two nonprofit organizations to get to know each other, because most of us at the Hawthorne Association knew very little to nothing about the Rufus Porter Museum. And I might guess that the opposite might be true as well. So it's always nice to integrate, because we have common needs and common interests.
Absolutely. Yeah, I happened to be on WGME's website one day and I saw the lovely press coverage you had about all the repairs that needed to be done. And I was like, the Hawthorne House, Raymond, huh? Literally the next day on my way to Bridgeton to go to work, I went and found the house and I drove right past it. And I was like, huh, who knew about this? And then I came back and I told my colleague at the museum, and she had never heard of it either. Our intern had never heard of it either. So it was a great way to spread the information. And exactly, it's great for us both to work together and to raise awareness for both of our organizations. So I'm glad this talk worked out. Let's see. Stephen says the wife of Richard Manning was Susan Dingley. Her sister was Sally Dingley, who married Captain Thomas Murch. Their great-grandson, Clyde Murch, was instrumental in obtaining the 501c3 status of the Hawthorne Community Association.
Thank you for that information. And yes, that does sound familiar. I have read enough of that to know that you're correct. A nice piece of historical information. And some of the, of course, the Dingley house, there on Cape Road, which is almost across from the Manning house, I believe is considered the oldest house in Raymond, and it's still mostly standing. It's been added to. Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the case.
So there is a question about the Manning House. Is it a museum as well? Someone would like to know.
No, it's a private home. It probably would be much more interesting to visit than the Hawthorne House, in fact, because it is maintained as a home with many original furnishings. But no, we're not going to break in on those people and bother them, I guess, unless they invite us.
I recently found two books about Hawthorns, which I found extremely interesting. One is called, if I remember correctly, this is memory, A New England Love Story, and his wife's name was Sophia.
Mhm.
And the struggles that they went through, she got migraine headaches, and he was a very moody, sometimes despondent man. The other book that I most recently wrote, which is at the Raymond Library, called The House of Hawthorne. And that goes into even more detail about their lives, and is absolutely fascinating. And I was talking to Tom today about the book, because it's amazing to me in the reading I've done about that kind of period, is that the near socially elite, like the Hawthorns would have been, she would not have been expected to work, but they really had no money. So consequently, here they were in Europe, trying to keep up with the wealthy people that they associated with, and never having enough money to support it. But I think those two books are really well worth reading.
Sounds good, Louise. Thank you for those ideas. Yes, they did have a lot of misfortune in their lives, in addition to never having a lot of money. His wife's health was not good, and their oldest daughter became mentally ill, and I believe was institutionalized later in life.
I see that Tony has a hand up again. You want to unmute? And
I spend a lot of time in Salem at the Hawthorne House of Seven Gables there, but there was an interesting book about Melville and Hawthorne and their relationship. And when Melville wrote Moby Dick at his house in Pittsfield, I think in Aerosmith, apparently Hawthorne had a little room off of Melville's room, and Melville did not allow his wife in the room. Hawthorne was the only one who had a private entrance. And so that sort of raised a few eyebrows.
Thank you. Very interesting.
very interesting. Well, great. Well, thank you, John. This has been so great. I've learned a lot, and I think a lot of other people did as well. And I'm glad we finally were able to make a connection. I know I'd met with some folks from the Hawthorne House. Oh, it was very early stages of COVID, and we just didn't know what was going to happen and how we'd be able to make something work. So I think this was a great way to at least do something together for the first time. And getting a lot of people involved that aren't in Maine that were able to attend this presentation. So I thank you very much. I thank everybody for coming. And I thank you all. It's been a very successful virtual lecture series. This is the first time the Rufus Porter Museum has done anything like this. And we did 3 of them, one in January, one in February, and then tonight's presentation. And I would say they were all a smashing success. So thank you very much. We do plan on doing it again. Again, it'll be a winter thing. We do open for the season in June. So we're going to be focusing on getting ready for that. So hope you'll come visit us in June, come visit the Hawthorne House in June. And if you like what you see here, please go to our website, rufusportermuseum.org, and become a member. I would say do the same for the Hawthorne Association as well. And thank you all for being here and have a lovely evening.
Same to you. Thanks, Carla.
Thank you.